If a king can reject destiny, destiny will simply choose another path. The words had been carved into the ancient moonstone arch for centuries, but no one standing inside the grand hall of Blackwood Citadel believed they would come true that night. Hundreds of noble wolves filled the towering chamber beneath silver banners that shimmered beneath the full moon pouring through the cathedral windows. Every heartbeat seemed to echo against the polished stone floor, as young women from every respected pack waited for the Alpha King's choice. Among them stood Evelyn Carter, a quiet Omega dressed in a simple ivory gown that had belonged to her late mother. The fabric was elegant despite its age, carefully mended by her own hands, yet it looked almost invisible beside the jeweled gown surrounding her. She kept her chin lifted anyway. For years, whispers had followed her through every village and gathering. Too quiet, too ordinary, too weak. Tonight was supposed to change everything. At least that was what her grandmother had always believed. Before her passing, she had held Evelyn's trembling hands and whispered that the moon goddess never revealed her greatest gifts until the final moment. Evelyn had carried those words through every lonely winter. Now the enormous doors opened. Silence swept across the hall like a cold wind as Alpha King Damien Blackwood entered. Tall, composed, and impossible to ignore, he wore a black ceremonial coat stitched with silver thread that reflected the moonlight like frost across fresh snow. His pale gray eyes moved across the gathered women with calm precision before finally stopping on Evelyn. Her pulse stumbled. Around them, elders exchanged knowing glances. Some smiled, convinced the old prophecy had reached its destined hour. Damien descended the marble steps until only a few feet separated them. For one suspended breath, Evelyn believed every painful year had led to this moment. Then his voice shattered the silence. "Evelyn Carter, I reject the bond that others expected me to accept. My future will not be decided by prophecy." A stunned hush swallowed the hall before scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Some covered their mouths. Others made no effort to hide their satisfaction. Evelyn felt every stare land on her like winter rain, but she refused to lower her eyes. Her hands trembled only once before she quietly folded them together. If heartbreak had a sound, she thought, perhaps it sounded exactly like a room pretending not to watch. Damien turned without another word and walked toward the royal platform, leaving whispers in his wake. Yet across the hall, another pair of eyes never left Evelyn. Ethan Ashford, the Alpha King's closest friend and most trusted commander, watched her not with pity, but with quiet respect. And as the moonlight touched the forgotten crest embroidered inside the sleeve of Evelyn's gown, a symbol hidden for generations shimmered so faintly that only destiny itself seemed to notice. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale silver, yet Blackwood Citadel still carried the weight of the previous night's silence. Servants polished marble floors while nobles whispered behind embroidered sleeves, repeating the same story with different smiles. Evelyn Carter had become the woman the Alpha King refused before the eyes of an entire kingdom. She folded the last of her belongings into a weathered leather satchel inside the small guest chamber that had never truly felt like hers. There was no reason to remain. She had promised herself years ago that if fate closed one door, she would leave before pride trapped her behind it. The old ivory gown rested carefully across the bed. As she reached to pack it away, her fingers brushed the faded crest hidden inside the sleeve. For just an instant, the silver threads shimmered beneath the morning sunlight before becoming ordinary again. Evelyn frowned, convincing herself exhaustion had played another trick on her eyes. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, Ethan Ashford stood quietly in the hallway wearing a dark traveling coat instead of his royal uniform. His expression carried neither sympathy nor discomfort, only calm sincerity. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said. Evelyn managed a small smile. "You are not. I was about to leave." Ethan glanced toward the packed satchel beside the bed. Without saying goodbye, she looked toward the castle windows overlooking the distant pine forest. "There is very little left to say." For a moment neither of them spoke. Outside, bells echoed across the courtyard as another day inside the kingdom continued as though nothing remarkable had happened. Finally Ethan reached into his coat and unfolded a parchment sealed with the Ashford family crest. "I came because I have a proposal, not one born from pity." Evelyn looked at him with cautious surprise. He continued before she could refuse. "Come with me to Ashford Keep. My people need someone kind, someone who listens before speaking. You would have your own home, complete freedom to leave whenever you wish, and no one would treat you as though your worth depends upon another person's decision. She searched his face for hidden motives and found none. People will misunderstand. Ethan smiled faintly. People already do. The honesty in those 4 words settled gently between them. For the first time since the ceremony, Evelyn felt the pressure around her chest loosen. She had expected lectures about destiny or promises that time healed every wound. Instead, Ethan offered something much simpler. A choice. She drew a slow breath. If I accept, I do not want anyone sacrificing their reputation for mine. Ethan shook his head. Respect is never a sacrifice. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Damian Blackwood emerged from a balcony overlooking the eastern gardens. He had not intended to interrupt, yet his eyes met Evelyn's for only a heartbeat before shifting toward the parchment in Ethan's hand. Something unreadable crossed his face, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Without speaking, he turned away and continued toward the council chamber. Evelyn watched him disappear beyond the stone archway. Whatever future she had imagined no longer existed. She looked back at Ethan, whose hand remained patiently extended, asking for nothing except her own decision. After one final glance at the castle she had entered with hope and would leave with quiet dignity, Evelyn placed her hand in his. Neither of them noticed the elderly groundskeeper watching from the courtyard below, his eyes widening as the hidden crest beneath Evelyn's folded sleeve caught the sunlight once again, glowing brighter than any ordinary thread ever could. Ashford Keep stood on a line of rolling hills where endless pine forests met open fields brushed by the autumn wind. It was smaller than Blackwood Citadel, yet warmth lived within its stone walls in a way the grand palace never had. As the carriage rolled through the front gate, Evelyn Carter expected curious stares and whispered judgment. Instead, the stable hands greeted Ethan Ashford with relaxed smiles before offering respectful bows to her without asking a single question. No one seemed interested in the ceremony she wished she could forget. No one looked at her with pity. They simply welcomed her as a guest. The quiet kindness unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Ethan showed her to a sunlit room overlooking a crystal lake that reflected the morning sky like polished glass. Fresh wildflowers rested on the windowsill, their sweet fragrance carried inside by the breeze. If there is anything you need, you only have to ask, Ethan said before stopping at the doorway. There are no expectations here except that you feel safe. After he left, Evelyn stood silently in the center of the room. Safe. The word felt unfamiliar, almost too fragile to believe. Days passed with surprising simplicity. She wandered through gardens bursting with late summer roses, helped elderly villagers organize the small library beside the chapel, and listened to children practicing songs beneath the giant maple tree at the center of the village square. Every greeting she received seemed genuine. Every smile arrived without hidden meaning. Little by little, the invisible weight she had carried for years began to fade. Ethan rarely interrupted her quiet moments, yet somehow he always appeared exactly when someone needed help repairing a fence, comforting a frightened child, or delivering supplies to a distant farmhouse. He never announced his rank or expected admiration. He simply served the people who trusted him. Evelyn found herself watching him from a distance more than once, wondering how someone raised beside a future king had remained so grounded. One cool evening they walked along the lakeshore as the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and amber. "Do you miss the capital?" Ethan asked gently. Evelyn considered the question before answering. "I miss the person I believed I would become there." Ethan nodded as though he understood without needing further explanation. Sometimes we chase the wrong future because it is the only one we have ever been shown. His words lingered in the quiet air long after they continued walking. Far away inside Blackwood Citadel, Damian Blackwood sat through another council meeting, but every discussion seemed strangely distant. Reports from neighboring territories blurred together while his thoughts drifted toward the woman who had left without anger, without demands, and without looking back. He had expected relief after rejecting the prophecy. Instead, an unfamiliar emptiness followed him through every corridor of the palace. That same night, beneath the rising full moon, Evelyn stepped onto the balcony outside her room. A cool breeze lifted the sleeve of her simple blue dress, revealing the faded family crest stitched inside the fabric she had carried from the capital. As silver moonlight touched the ancient embroidery, delicate lines of light spread across the threads like tiny rivers awakening after a long winter. The crest glowed brighter than before, and somewhere beneath Ashford Keep, hidden behind walls forgotten by history, an ancient stone door released a quiet echo as though it had been waiting years for someone to finally come home. The echo that had awakened beneath Ashford Keep refused to fade. Before sunrise, the castle's oldest caretaker, Harold Bennett, stood quietly outside Ethan Ashford's study with an expression Ethan had never seen before. The elderly man had served 3 generations of the Ashford family, and nothing seemed capable of surprising him. Yet this morning his hands trembled around a heavy iron key blackened with age. "My lord," Harold said softly, "the Hall of Origins has opened." Ethan looked up from the reports scattered across his desk. "That chamber has been sealed for hundreds of years." Harold nodded. "Until last night." Neither man spoke for several seconds. According to family records, the underground hall had never responded to strength, rank, or royal authority. It could only be opened by a bloodline long believed to have disappeared from history. Ethan immediately thought of the faint silver light he had noticed around Evelyn's sleeve beneath the moon. He did not mention it. Instead, he thanked Harold and quietly walked toward the eastern gardens where Evelyn often spent her mornings reading beneath an ancient oak tree. She was already there, a worn leather book resting on her lap while sunlight filtered gently through golden leaves above her. She smiled as Ethan approached, unaware that the peaceful morning was about to change everything. "Would you like to see something no one has entered for centuries?" he asked. Curiosity replaced her quiet smile. Together they followed Harold through narrow stone passages, hidden behind the oldest wing of the castle. The air grew cooler with every step until they reached an enormous circular doorway carved with wolves, stars, and crescent moons intertwined in intricate patterns. The ancient stone door stood open by only a few inches. Harold stopped several feet away. "It would not move for anyone," he whispered, "until after you arrived." Evelyn hesitated before placing one careful hand against the weathered surface. The moment her fingertips touched the stone, silver lines spread gently across every carved symbol like moonlight flowing over calm water. The heavy door continued opening without effort, revealing a vast chamber untouched by time. Dust floated through soft beams of light descending from hidden openings high above. Marble statues lined both sides of the hall, each depicting kings and queens whose faces had been worn smooth by centuries. Yet as Evelyn stepped inside, every statue reflected a faint silver glow. At the center of the chamber rested a pedestal supporting a single crystal sphere surrounded by faded inscriptions written in an ancient language no one present could read. Harold slowly removed his spectacles, staring in disbelief. "It has awakened," he whispered. Evelyn moved closer without understanding why her heartbeat suddenly felt perfectly steady. The crystal remained dark until she stood within a few feet of it. Then gentle light blossomed from its center, revealing the reflection of a young woman wearing a crown shaped like moonlit branches. The face inside the crystal looked astonishingly familiar. Ethan stared from the glowing image to Evelyn and back again. Even the same calm gray eyes looked back at them. Before anyone could speak, a hidden mechanism echoed somewhere deep within the chamber. A narrow stone drawer slid open beneath the pedestal, revealing an ancient parchment sealed with silver wax that had somehow remained untouched by time. Across the seal was the same forgotten crest stitched inside Evelyn's mother's gown, shining now with unmistakable brilliance. Harold carefully lifted the ancient parchment from the stone drawer, as though even the air around it deserved respect. The silver wax seal remained unbroken despite the passing centuries, yet the instant Evelyn Carter stepped closer, the seal quietly separated on its own and fell into Harold's waiting hands without leaving a single crack behind. None of them spoke. The silence inside the Hall of Origins felt sacred, interrupted only by the faint sound of crystal light shimmering across the marble floor. Ethan Ashford unfolded the brittle document with extraordinary care. The ink had not faded. Every elegant letter remained perfectly clear, as though the message had been written only yesterday. At the top stood the same forgotten crest embroidered inside Evelyn's mother's gown. Beneath it appeared a single sentence that caused Harold to slowly remove his glasses once again. "When the last daughter of the Moon Sovereign returns, The hidden crown shall awaken, and the kingdom shall remember the blood it chose to forget. Evelyn stared at the words, unable to understand why they stirred memories she did not actually possess. She had always believed her family had been ordinary people, who quietly disappeared from history after generations of hardship. Nothing in her childhood suggested royal ancestry or ancient power. Harold continued reading aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. The scroll described a bloodline that had guided the earliest wolf kingdoms long before the first alpha kings united the territories. The moon sovereigns had never ruled through fear or conquest. Their authority came from wisdom, compassion, and an unusual gift that allowed them to calm conflicts before they became wars. According to the record, the final heir had vanished centuries earlier to protect the bloodline from those who desired its influence. Every trace of the family had disappeared. Every official history declared them extinct. Ethan slowly lowered the parchment, his thoughts racing faster than he could organize them. Suddenly countless small moments began fitting together. The glowing crest, the crystal image, the ancient door that had responded only to Evelyn. None of it had been coincidence. Before anyone could speak again, the crystal sphere brightened until soft silver light filled the chamber. A calm feminine voice echoed through the hall, gentle enough to sound almost like the wind moving through distant trees. The blood remembers what history erased. Evelyn instinctively looked around, but no one stood beside them. The voice continued. The true heir will never seek the crown. The crown will seek her. Tears quietly gathered in Evelyn's eyes. Not from fear but from the overwhelming feeling that someone had been waiting for her across generations she had never known. Hundreds of miles away inside Blackwood Citadel, Damien Blackwood sat alone inside the Royal Library studying forgotten maps when an elderly historian hurried into the room carrying a weathered journal recently discovered beneath the archives. Your Majesty, the old scholar said with visible excitement, we found a reference to the Moon Sovereign bloodline. Damien accepted the journal with little expectation until his eyes reached a faded illustration near the center of the page. His breath caught. The delicate crest drawn beside the ancient text matched exactly the silver embroidery he remembered seeing inside the sleeve of Evelyn's gown on the night she quietly walked away. For the first time since the ceremony, certainty replaced every lingering doubt. He had not rejected an ordinary Omega. Without realizing it, he had turned away the last living heir to a forgotten legacy capable of changing the future of every kingdom beneath the moon. Damien Blackwood left Blackwood Citadel before dawn with only 2 trusted riders following several hundred yards behind. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, he ignored royal ceremony, council meetings, and every carefully planned obligation that had defined his reign. The journal rested inside his saddlebag, yet its words echoed more loudly than the sound of hoofbeats across the quiet forest trails. Every mile carried him farther from certainty and closer to a truth he could no longer deny. He had believed rejecting the prophecy would protect his kingdom from blind tradition. Instead, he had rejected the one woman whose presence awakened a history buried beneath generations of silence. At Ashford Keep, life continued with peaceful rhythm. Evelyn Carter spent the morning helping children gather herbs in the castle gardens, while elderly villagers shared stories beneath the shade of towering oak trees. Laughter replaced the whispers that had once followed her through crowded halls. She had stopped measuring her worth by the opinions of strangers. For the first time in years, she felt free enough to smile without wondering who might take it away. Ethan watched from a respectful distance, quietly grateful that the sadness in her eyes appeared a little lighter each passing day. Harold approached him carrying another bundle of ancient records recovered from the Hall of Origins. Among them rested a faded map marked with silver symbols connecting forgotten sanctuaries hidden throughout the Northern Territories. These places only reveal themselves to the true heir, Harold explained. If the old records are correct, they will continue awakening one by one. Ethan carefully folded the map. Then we tell no one until Evelyn decides what she wants. Harold nodded with visible relief. Exactly the answer I hoped you would give. Late that afternoon, the peaceful sound of birds gave way to the distant rhythm of approaching horses. Castle guards exchanged cautious glances before opening the outer gate. Damien dismounted alone, leaving his escort outside the walls. He wore no ceremonial cloak and carried no royal banner, only the quiet expression of a man who had spent too many sleepless nights replaying a single decision. Ethan met him in the courtyard. For several long seconds neither friend spoke. Countless battles had forged their loyalty, yet this silence felt heavier than any battlefield either had ever crossed. Damien finally broke it. "I came to speak with Evelyn." Ethan studied him carefully. "As my king or as yourself?" Damien answered without hesitation. "As the man who made a mistake." Ethan looked toward the garden where Evelyn was helping a little girl weave wildflowers into a small crown. The child laughed as Evelyn gently adjusted the flowers until they fit perfectly. It was such a simple moment, yet Damien realized he had never truly seen her before. He had noticed prophecy, expectation, and politics. He had never noticed kindness. Ethan lowered his voice. "If you speak with her, understand something first. She is no longer waiting for anyone to decide her future." Damien accepted those words without argument because he knew they were true. Before either man moved another step, a soft silver breeze swept across the courtyard although the evening air had been perfectly still only moments earlier. Tiny strands of light drifted through the garden like floating stars before gathering around Evelyn's shoulders. The children watched with delighted amazement while flowers throughout the entire courtyard slowly turned toward her, as though greeting someone they had been expecting for centuries. The shimmering light lingered around Evelyn Carter long after the children had run laughing across the courtyard, chasing glowing petals that dissolved into the evening breeze like tiny stars. None of them understood what they had witnessed. To them it felt like magic wrapped inside a beautiful sunset. But Harold Bennett stood perfectly still, his weathered face filled with quiet certainty. He had spent decades studying forgotten histories, and he knew ancient signs rarely appeared. Without purpose, Damien Blackwood watched from the edge of the garden, unable to look away. Every instinct that had guided him as Alpha King now whispered the same uncomfortable truth. The kingdom had begun recognizing Evelyn long before he had. She finally noticed his presence and gently handed the flower crown to the little girl standing beside her. The child smiled before skipping toward her family, leaving the garden wrapped in peaceful silence. Evelyn slowly approached, stopping several feet from Damien. The distance between them felt greater than the mile she had traveled after leaving Blackwood Citadel. Damien lowered his head slightly, not as a king addressing a subject, but as a man searching for words worthy of someone he had deeply misunderstood. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Not because of what I recently learned, but because I judged your future before I ever tried to know your heart." Evelyn listened without interrupting. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine through the gardens as golden sunlight faded behind the hills. "For a long time," Damien continued, "I believed refusing the prophecy was an act of strength. I thought I was protecting my kingdom from old traditions. Instead, I failed to see the person standing in front of me." Evelyn looked toward the distant lake before answering. "You did what you believed was right at the time." Damien's expression softened, but relief never came. "Believing I was right does not erase the consequences." Ethan remained several steps behind them, saying nothing. He understood that some conversations belonged only to those whose choices had shaped them. Evelyn turned back toward Damien, her gray eyes calm in the fading light. "When you rejected me, I believed my life had ended. Now I realize it was only beginning. I found peace because I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me who I was." Her words settled gently between them. Damien accepted each one without defense because they were deserved. Before he could respond, Harold emerged carrying another ancient scroll recovered from the Hall of Origins. "My lords," he said with respectful urgency, "there is something you both should see." He carefully unrolled the parchment across a nearby stone table. A detailed map slowly appeared beneath the evening light, revealing symbols scattered throughout every major territory in the kingdom. One by one, the silver markings began glowing until they formed a connected pattern surrounding Ashford Keep. At the center of the map rested a single inscription written in the same elegant script as the first scroll. Harold translated the ancient words with quiet reverence. "When the heir chooses with a willing heart rather than fear, the circle of sovereigns will awaken, and every hidden sanctuary shall answer her call." The final word had barely left his lips when a deep bell echoed across the distant hills, though no church or tower stood anywhere nearby. The sound rolled across the valleys like a gentle promise carried by the wind, and far beyond the horizon, Forgotten sanctuaries that had slept for centuries welcomed the return of the bloodline they had faithfully waited to serve. The ancient bell echoed through the valleys long after its final note had faded, leaving an unusual stillness over Ashford Keep. It was not the silence of uncertainty, but the quiet that arrived when history finally remembered its own name. Word of the awakening spread carefully among trusted elders, yet Evelyn Carter asked for only one thing. She did not want celebrations, ceremonies, or declarations. She wanted time to understand the life that had been hidden from her since childhood. Ethan Ashford honored that request without hesitation. He quietly instructed every member of his household that no one was to pressure Evelyn into accepting a title she had never sought. His respect gave her room to breathe, and somehow that simple kindness carried more meaning than grand promises ever could. The following morning, they walked together through a meadow where wildflowers swayed beneath the gentle autumn breeze. The rising sun painted the rolling hills in soft shades of gold, while distant birds welcomed another peaceful day. Evelyn looked across the endless landscape and smiled in a way Ethan had never seen before. It was no longer the careful smile of someone afraid to hope. It was the quiet expression of a woman finally discovering who she had always been. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan looked at her with mild surprise. "For what?" She glanced toward the mountains beyond the horizon. "For never asking me to become someone else." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before answering. "The person you already are has always been enough." His words settled gently between them, carrying no expectation beyond simple truth. At that same hour, Damien Blackwood prepared to leave Ashford Keep. Before mounting his horse, he requested one final conversation with Evelyn. They met beside the crystal lake where the water reflected drifting clouds like polished silver glass. Damien no longer carried the certainty of a king who believed every decision belonged to him. Instead, he spoke with the honesty of a man who had learned humility through regret. "I cannot change what happened," he admitted. "But if there is ever anything I can do to earn your forgiveness, I will." Evelyn looked across the calm water before turning back toward him. "Forgiveness is not something you must earn from me. I forgave you when I stopped letting that moment define my future." Damien quietly absorbed her answer. It brought peace, but not the peace he had expected. He finally understood that forgiveness did not always restore what had been lost. Sometimes it simply allowed both people to walk forward without bitterness. He smiled for the first time in many days. "Then I hope your future is brighter than anything I imagined for you." Evelyn returned the smile with gentle sincerity. "I think it already is." Damien nodded respectfully before stepping back. As he rode away through the castle gates, he never looked behind him. Some chapters deserved to remain closed. Ethan approached only after the sound of departing horses had disappeared beyond the hills. Neither of them spoke immediately. They simply stood together beneath the clear autumn sky, watching sunlight dance across the quiet lake. Evelyn reached for his hand of her own choosing. There was no prophecy guiding the moment, no ancient law demanding it, and no audience waiting to applaud. There was only trust freely given. As their hands met, the silver crest hidden inside Evelyn's sleeve glowed once more, and far beyond the distant mountains, the final sanctuary of the moon sovereigns awakened beneath the morning light, as though the kingdom itself had accepted the choice made not by destiny alone, but by the courage of an unguarded heart. Weeks later, representatives from every northern territory gathered beneath the ancient moonstone arch where Evelyn Carter had once stood believing her future depended upon someone else's choice. This time she arrived without fear. She wore a simple silver gown embroidered with the restored crest of the moon sovereigns, not as a symbol of power, but as a quiet reminder that truth could remain hidden without ever disappearing. The great hall felt different now. The whispers had vanished, replaced by respectful silence. Elders, leaders, and families from distant lands stood together, waiting not for a prophecy to decide their future, but for history to finally be made whole. Harold Bennett stepped forward and read the final passage recovered from the Hall of Origins. It declared that the Moon Sovereign bloodline had never existed to rule over kingdoms. Its purpose had always been to unite them through wisdom, compassion, and freely chosen loyalty. As his voice faded, the silver crest above the archway shone with gentle light, confirming what every witness already felt inside their hearts. Damien Blackwood walked toward the center of the hall and stopped before Evelyn. There was no crown upon his head, no royal announcement waiting behind him. He simply bowed with sincere respect. "I once believed strength meant making every decision alone," he said. "You taught me that true strength begins with seeing the value in others." Evelyn smiled with quiet kindness. "We both learned something that day." Damien returned the smile before stepping aside, leaving the center of the hall not to himself, but to the future that no longer belonged to the past. Ethan Ashford approached Evelyn without ceremony. He did not kneel. He did not make a speech. He simply offered his hand exactly as he had on the morning she chose to leave the capital. This time everyone understood what that gesture truly meant. Evelyn placed her hand in his with complete confidence. The ancient crystal hidden beneath Ashford keep awakened one final time, sending gentle silver light across every sanctuary that had answered her call. Bells echoed through the valleys, not as warnings, but as a celebration remembered by the land itself. Children laughed in the courtyards, families embraced, and the old stories that had nearly been forgotten found new life in hopeful voices. As the sun climbed above the mountains, Evelyn looked across the gathered kingdom and realized she had never needed to become someone worthy of love. She had only needed the courage to remain herself until the right people recognized her worth. Sometimes destiny does not reward the one who waits for a crown. Sometimes it quietly leads the forgotten heart toward the people who never asked it to change. And in that choice, an entire kingdom found its way home.